This is Damien from AtHope, and I am an axiological atheist, which can simply be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. Or another way of saying it, anything that has an evaluation property in philosophy or connected thinking, this is a process of how to do that with a standard. So I'm here with a guest today who calls himself the Atheist Pastor. So I'm kind of curious about what that means. So go ahead, tell us a little bit about yourself and about what that you mean by that term.
Sure. So Chris is fine. Most people call me Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Atheist Pastor. So Atheist Pastor is a bit of a. I started off as a bit of a joke for myself. I'm a former Christian leader, and one thing that when I was going through that journey in the church, even when I first got into the church, I had a lot of people prophesy over me that I was going to be a pastor, and I was going to do wonderful things for the kingdom of God. So when I became a full-blown atheist, I thought, well, I don't want to let those people down, so I'm still going to be a pastor. I'm just going to be the atheist pastor.
That's funny. All right, thanks. So can you tell us a little bit about your life? Were you born religious, and how did you come to the conclusion of atheism?
So I actually wasn't born in a particularly religious family. So we were, I guess what you'd call, nominal Anglicans, or Church of England. And by that I mean when the census came around or we had to tick the religion box, we ticked Church of England or Anglican, but never actually went to church. At one point when I was a kid, my mother did take me to a uniting church. She thought it would be good for me and her to go to a church. That lasted 1 week. I got kicked out of Sunday school for asking too many questions. Not a lot's changed since, and she didn't really like it, and that was kind of the end of that. So I never really had a religious upbringing. It was after I guess my parents split when I was in my late teens, sort of in the I guess that end of high school period, and I kind of went out and I did my own thing, so I moved out of home. I was about 16, 17. I was on my own, and still had a great relationship with my parents. It was just, I decided that I just wanted to start supporting myself, but it sort of left a bit of a gap in my life, I guess. So I started looking into a few different religions, movements. I ended up fairly heavily studying things like ancient aliens and ufology, just because being a big sci-fi nerd, it was something that interested me. And from there, I guess that sort of, I guess my real introduction to religion, or Christianity in particular, apart from, I guess, we all knew the story of Noah's Ark and some of the basics, who was who and things like that. But what happened was it introduced me to that because of the ancient alien stories, for lack of a better term. That I always thought it was garbage.
Right, I see them as conspiracy theories of reality. I mean, they supposedly debunk the Bible or whatever with the ancient alien, but I don't see it as debunking, because it's just adding one conspiracy theory on top of another conspiracy theory of reality.
Yeah, look, all it's doing is what a lot of Christians do, and that's sort of using a verse here or a verse there, or just taking little bits and pieces and having the conclusion already and then twisting it to that. So there were some things that it was probably just more I learned stuff more than anything. I didn't. So I probably was into it more for entertainment purposes. But I used to poke fun at Christians who, I always had Christians trying to get at me, and I'd sort of throw a few little things at them. And because most Christians with good intentions, they don't know their Bibles, and because I had this base sort of level understanding of a few. Like this little bit here, that little bit there. I used to have a bit of fun with that. But he tried to get me along for a lot of times, and we ended up kind of falling away a bit because it was just, I kind of got over it a bit because he was constantly at me. And in the meantime, I started work and met another guy who was right into it, and I threw a few things at him, and he was probably the first honest Christian I'd ever met. And he said, I can't answer those questions, but come along to church with me. If you're not doing anything on Sunday night, my pastor will answer those questions for you. So I went along for a laugh, and the next thing you know, I'm throwing my hand up and giving my life to Jesus, because I think, quite frankly, at that time, I was fairly lonely. I was looking for connection. All of a sudden, I had all these people wanting to come connect with me, bring me into their group, and it was oh wow, hey, this is really cool. And that was very much in my early 20s. So from there, as I tend to do with a lot of things, I dug right into it. I got right into it. I wanted to know it. I wanted to understand it, and I guess I tried to learn as much as I could, but instead of learning it from the Bible, I was learning it from different church leaders, reading this book, that book, things like The Case for Christ, or anything that people were throwing at me, and that's how I was absorbing lots of it, and learning the one or two lines here or there. But I guess along the way, and this is over a period of many years, I found myself in leadership. I can fortunately hold a tune, or fortunately or unfortunately, depending on who you ask. I can hold a tune, so I found myself at the front, worship leadership, a fair bit. So, I was within the Pentecostal movement, so very charismatic, very hands in the air, happy, clappy, and music's a big part of it. Because I've always had an interest in history, so I guess, I was able to read things, understand things, look at archaeology, and obviously I'm looking at, tainted sources, as I've now put it. But it put me ahead of most with the knowledge. So it started me on a path where I went down. I was doing a Bachelor of Theology and a Bachelor of Ministry. The intention was that I was going to be a pastor of church leadership. I was with a reasonably large church. It would have been a very, very comfortable and good for me career-wise, but along the way I just discovered it was rubbish. I say that. That's compressing it. I discovered a few holes. The first thing that really got me was evolution and Genesis. And I remember sitting in an Old Testament class and the lecturer or the professor I hate saying that, in light of who it was saying that he was very much a young earth creationist, and he was pushing the young earth creationist model. And that was always something that I had an issue, even though I'd sort of, absorbed all the Kent Hovind and Ken Ham stuff, and when we went out and taught at schools and things like that, we used to take Kent Hovind stuff with us. I'm very embarrassed to say, but I'd always had an issue with that, and I thought, well, here I am in a university, sort of setting. Yes, it's Bible college, but it's a bachelor's degree that I'm doing. So I basically said, well, how can evolution fit in with Genesis? I mean, could it be seen as something poetic? Is there other options? And I got laughed at by an entire class and a professor, and I thought, you know what, let's start at the wheel saying this isn't where people come to learn.
Yeah.
This is where people come to get told what they have to believe. And I thought, that's not what I want. But it got me to looking into things. And the more I studied the Bible, and even, I guess, looking at it from what was there and the inconsistencies in it, but also the historical narrative that it was pushing. It came to me whole for me, and I just gradually and slowly found myself going to church less and less, and the next thing you know, I'm jumping on YouTube and calling myself the Atheist Pastor.
Right on.
That's very much compressing
that's great. So I'm really interested and had you on because I really like that you have training in history. That's definitely something that I like: history, prehistory, archaeology, anthropology. I like all that stuff. I've been looking into it for about 10 years more, but actually since 2006 really. So how did you get into formal training in history? It's beyond the Bible, right? Or did you do it on your own?
Oh, absolutely beyond the Bible. So it originally happened by accident. So what had happened was in Australia we have the final 2 years of school are what we call year 11 and 12. And what you do is you pick subjects for year 11 and 12 that you basically, you pick an English. Not everyone has to do the same subjects. It's selective. And I'd actually chosen economics. Anyway, I've gone into the economics class. Everyone in that class I hated. The teacher I couldn't stand. And all my mates were doing history. And I'd never really done history, but I thought, you know what, to hell with it. I'm just going to change to history. So I ended up doing history and fell in love with it. So predominantly modern history. It was modern history was a subject I did. Fell in love with it, got extremely high marks. I didn't go on and do university at the time just because I wasn't in a position where I could. As I sort of mentioned, sort of 16, 17, I'm supporting myself, I'm looking after myself. University just wasn't an option for me, and I always thought it might be nice to do one day, but that day just took a little bit longer. And obviously I've always sort of read history, always had an interest in history, but I guess while I was doing a lot of the religious studies and training, that sort of took over. But I'm actually now I'm not graduated, I don't have the degree as yet, but I'm just finishing my undergraduate studies in history. I'm doing a history and politics major and also an ancient history minor as well,
Cool.
with the plan that I'm going to do post-grad. I've got the results where I'm going to do post-grad, and eventually, well, not eventually, but in the next few years, I'd like to be doing my PhD in history.
Right on.
So
what area in history are you finding yourself most interested in? Still modern?
See, I'm torn. I'm badly torn. I've got a huge fascination with the Cold War era. I've always sort of held that as something. Being Australian and into politics, Australian political history interests me. But then because I've always, even though I'm an atheist, because I've always held that interest in that biblical sort of history, I do have a strong interest in that, even though ancient history is certainly, it's not my major area of study. I think when it comes to the PhD, I'm most likely going to be doing it on, I'll actually do it on chaplains in the First World War, Australian chaplains in the First World War. I sort of started, I guess, the process and directing my studies that way. But ultimately, I would like to branch out certainly into, I think, considering what I do, definitely that biblical history as well. But the Cold War keeps pulling me back as well. I mean, it's one of my most, I guess, the most memorable childhood memories I've got, I guess, of what was going on was when the Berlin Wall came down. You know, I was only, I would have been 8 at the time, but I remember that vividly. And I remember when Boris Yeltsin was on top of the tanks and, the Soviet Union was collapsing, and understanding what a big deal that was. So I'm often torn, and that's, I guess, the problem with being an absolute history nerd is there's so much out there that you can fall in love with, and there's also certain things that I just kind of go, you know what, I've got zero interest in that. But ironically, it's where it looks like I'll be writing my thesis is on chaplains, Australian chaplains in the First World War. So
can you tell us something interesting about that you know? Or are you still working on it?
Look, I've certainly done a lot of research into it. The denomination of the chaplain was certainly, in Australia in particular, was certainly, I guess, depended on how they were viewed and how, I guess, what they did. The Catholic chaplains generally weren't very liked, same with the Anglican chaplains, because they tended to just kind of sit back and, I guess, not support so much, but they were there and sort of thought they ran the place. They were very much like the officers. Whereas you had the Presbyterians, which is like the Scottish, and they got right in. It's the first chaplain who was killed in the First World War in Australia was a fellow called Andrew Gillison. And I've actually done some research and uncovered an old cover-up of all things.
Oh, yeah?
Chaplains weren't meant to be active participants. But this fellow, his name was Captain Andrew Gillison, and he was in his 40s, but he previously, before he'd come to Australia, he'd been in the Scottish Royal Rifles, Edinburgh Rifles, I think. And then he was a top shot. He'd always win all the rifle competitions. So he's gone over, and what it looks like he was doing was he'd go up and he'd actually sort of sit in the post and sort of say, hey, give me the rifle, and he was actively involved. And some of the things that came out, there was a few things where he was quoted and sort of saying, I hope that that the Turks that I've killed don't have any kids, and I pray for them after this. He said, but I've got to look after my boys. And he was very much a military man, an old military man. But what had happened was he was actually the first Australian chaplain to die, and he died in a place called Gallipoli in Turkey. And what had happened was he was delivering a talk, and he heard someone out in no man's land sort of moaning, and they saw him. What there was an injured man who wasn't dead, but he wasn't doing too good either. And anyway, he sort of said to one of the other padres who was there, "Come on, let's go and get him." And this padre's going, "No chance. I'm not doing that." But he's grabbed a couple of other guys and said, "Come on, let's go and get him." And as they were getting him and dragging this man back to safety, he got shot and unfortunately died a few hours later. So I originally went into, it was a subject I was doing on Australians in the Great War, and I decided I picked chaplains because I thought, I wanted to look and, I guess, try and expose how the church uses, things like war to, I guess, recruit people into their religion. I actually found quite the opposite with this fellow. So, I never ever thought I'd be writing a puff piece on a chaplain, but there you go.
Right on. That sounds great. And I appreciate, when people have, niches that they really go into, because it allows us to see the, reality of history a lot better. I mean, we a lot of times make assumptions, and that doesn't mean they're right. So I do think
well, that's it. And there's a new movement happening in history at the moment, which is called history from the bottom up, which is there's always when people look at history, they're always looking at the great man history. They're looking at the Churchill, the Roosevelt, Truman, all these great men that were there, but they're not looking at the actual stories of the people who were living in the time. And I guess it's harder with, I guess, a lot of anything sort of over a couple of hundred years. Excuse me. It's harder with anything over a couple of 100 years old, because what will tend to happen is you get to eras where I guess those people weren't necessarily literate, but then I guess now we're able to get a better picture. Even things like, when I do Australian history research, the Old Bailey, which is the court in London, where pretty much all the convicts were sentenced. You can read the stories and read the history behind the court transcripts and what was said. And there's so much in history that we haven't dug into, because we always look at the great man history, but this history from the bottom up, there's so much that we can learn to give us a really good understanding on, I guess, not only the historical aspect of what was going on, but who we are. I mean, because the dreams and, I guess, aspirations of people who probably would have been, I guess, class-wise, for lack of a better term, the same as you or I. I mean, neither of us are great leaders of our countries, and unless I'm mistaken. Unless there's something you're not telling me. We get to see, I guess you can compare, your aspirations, your thoughts, how you lived, directly to how someone in a similar position, but 100, 200 years ago also lived. And sometimes we can get lucky, and you'll find that one person in the village in medieval Europe who happened to be literate and was able to write things down. So we can get lucky. And I know there's been a lot of stuff, especially in Germany, that they found from people who were living like during the Holy Roman period, especially sort of towards that mid-15th century. There's actually a lot that's starting to come up. It's just the problem is it's in German, so it can make it a bit difficult. But there's so much from that historical point of view that we still are able to learn every day.
Well, yeah, and I think
that was a very long answer. Sorry.
No, sorry, that's great. So, I have the same experience too. Like some of the archaeology that I know, or I look at, is in French or German or Japanese and stuff. And the great thing is, though, that when those things are on Google, I just hit translate to English, and bam, there we go.
Oh yeah, it certainly helps.
Man,
I don't know what we did without it.
Oh yeah, well, because there's a bunch of stuff that I know the particulars, because sometimes like American archaeology things, like kind of like what you're saying. Sometimes they'll just reference a site, but they don't go like in depth into, what it is. And I want to know something, more particular. And so I have to go to a source that's not even, in English. So I understand how it definitely, and then like some people will look at those kind of things and don't even think about translating them. So like even like I posted a couple times blogs or articles that were written in their language. I try to put like a little bit of English on top just in case, that. Because a lot of people, it seems like, they just want the cliff notes to everything. And that's not really a good way to get a grasp of history.
But you can't do that with history. You can't just kind of brush over the top of things. I think you see a lot of people who try and expert in everything, a jack of all trades. But with history, you've got to dig right in. You've got to go right into the lives of people. You've got to understand the context and everything surrounding it. But as far as probably a language for history, German is probably the best language you could know. I had started this semester doing German, but unfortunately with everything going on, and yes, in the world at the moment, I won't say the C word.
Well, Guten Morgen, right?
Sorry?
Guten Morgen.
Guten Morgen. Yes. Nothing's good yet. Well, actually, it's not Morgan for me, so I would say Guten Tag.
Oh, okay. Sorry. It's morning for me.
But it's actually, so I had started it, and when I say started, I mean I'm talking like I was 3 or 4 weeks into it, and then the world changes overnight. So I'm probably going to drop German because it was something I took as an additional subject, but now the way that I have to study has drastically changed. So doing a language by correspondence is fairly intensive. So I think we might save that for another time.
Right.
Hopefully I can sort of do something with my postgrad or something, or while I'm doing my postgrad, but we'll see.
So you said you're going to do some stuff on the Bible. What stuff interests you about biblical history exactly, or that time frame?
Did Jesus exist?
What's that? Ditches?
Oh, sorry, you there?
No, what did you say? Ditches exist? I didn't understand.
Did Jesus exist?
Oh, did Jesus exist? First.
Jesus mysticism, or the era, or the question of did Jesus exist, is something that does interest me. And the reason it interests me is because Jesus is such a big figure in so many religions apart from Christianity. He's just been accepted. He's never really been looked into. He's never been dug into. There's zero archaeological evidence he was around at the time. There's zero written evidence. And on top of that, there's a lot of inconsistencies in, I guess, the closest thing to the primary sources, which are the epistles and the gospels. So it's something that's really piqued my interest. When I first came across it, I thought, oh, this is a bit of a crackpot thing because, as far as I was concerned, well, it's okay, no, he's not the Son of God, but yes, a man called Jesus existed. But the more and more I look into it, it's, well, did he? Because I'm not convinced. In fact, I'm probably more convinced that he didn't exist.
Yeah, I'm similarly extremely doubtful of the Jesus. Certainly, I don't think there was any, if there was a person, it was nothing like what they talk about in the stories.
Oh, no.
So,
no.
And since I also know when I took a class on the Bible in college, that, Jesus, that Mark was written first, as far as the Gospels. Right. And that they were written after, in a sense, Paul, and probably so. That already bothered me. Like when I first heard that, I was like the chronology of how the Bible's laid out now is not the actual order in which they were given, and that to me already was like, what? I mean, I started just that one fact that they were moving stuff around. That already, like, when I was a Christian, I started like really doubting. Who does that? Because it sounds like they're trying to create a story.
And the other thing is, Mark was written at best 35 years after Jesus would have died. Right. So although there's a bit of a 3-year gap on when he could have, what year he would have died, depending on whether you look at Mark, Matthew, Luke, or the Gospel of John, because the dates don't add up. Each of them. But basically Mark is written, and Mark is clearly not written by someone who is familiar with the area, because there's a lot of errors as far as the geography of it. Matthew essentially comes in, from what I can see, to kind of correct it or to fix it. And Luke is someone who was most likely a follower of Paul's, although he may have been a follower of the Pauline cult after the death of Paul, potentially, but certainly a follower of Paul, who then went and, re-edited what was there. And then John's just a completely different book about a completely different person.
Isn't that the one that's the most like magical and most miracles or something like that? I think. John?
Oh yeah, he's super Jesus.
Yeah, super Jesus.
Mark's got a very human, Jesus, whereas in John he's just like he's casting things out, and he's probably walking around zapping people with lightning as he goes. A bit like Shazam. It's a very different narrative and a very different character, and that's, I guess, from a historical point of view. When you read something and you read about the character, you can read about the character of someone. From a historical perspective, looking at those two, so the first and the last one written, they're completely different.
Oh, totally.
The other thing too, Paul never mentions a physical Jesus. So the Pauline epistles, not all of them were written by Paul. Some of them were attributed to Paul, but were written much later. But of the 7, I believe that everyone, or most historians, sort of say, well, yeah, these are the ones that we would say were written by Paul. There's no mention of a physical person called Jesus. So, he's certainly referred to as, the Son and the Spirit. And
well, didn't he also not refer to the cross? I think it's been a long time. I read the Bible twice, but it's been a long time since I really studied the Bible.
I don't believe so.
And also, Mark.
I'm not sure whether there'll be someone who will correct me, but I don't believe there is.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. And also, isn't that Mark ends with basically just Jesus dying, almost like the Passion of the Christ thing show that Mel Gibson did. Mark just cuts off, and now there's I think a last paragraph, but it's considered to be a forgery.
Yeah.
But Mark basically, the original, didn't even have him raised from the dead. So, I mean, where's your Savior Jesus? He doesn't even raise from the dead as far as Mark is concerned.
No, well, it was added later, and even Christian theologians will say, yes, that was something added after, but then their answer for that is that clearly it was something that was probably part of the original, and it had to be added back into it, and it was by divine revelation, or the usual. Let's just do a bit of a run around to make this fit into.
Yeah, because that's how history works.
Yeah. But,
good scholarly history always goes, let's just add shit.
Started with the premise that it was the Son of God and he rose from the dead. Now let's make the history fit into that. Whereas, historians actually look at it and say, all right, what does it say? And let's get the narrative from the documents, from the sources, from the facts. What do we know?
Yeah. Well, and isn't it too that some of the stuff that is supposedly written by Josephus, I think, has a later time persuasion to it or something like that, so they're considered that probably the stuff is forgeries also?
Yeah, it was, I believe, a 4th century edition. What it was in the original, it basically says there's Christians and they believe their saviour was Jesus, which there's no doubt that in the early 2nd century, there was a group of people called the Christians who believed that Jesus Christ died on a cross. That's fine. We can accept that. But then the bit that was added was, I think it was, called Jesus, if he be called a man, because he did all these miraculous things, and many saw him, and many saw him rise from the dead. So it was clearly something that was added. But how you know it's a forgery is in the when earlier Christians had written, I believe it was, might have been Clement of Alexandria, and I apologise, this isn't my strongest. I believe Clement of Alexandria had written that he was disappointed and how, it was horrific that Josephus hadn't mentioned more about Jesus. Whereas if this thing was in there, then, that would be clearly something they would mention.
Right.
And even other writers prior to the forgery had, paraphrased had quoted what Josephus had written about Jesus. So we know from that, out of nowhere, all of a sudden from about the 4th century onwards, people start talking about, hang on, this other bit, all of a sudden that's there, but the earlier writings don't reference it. So you can pretty much, not pretty much, we can confirm that it was a forgery. With about 99.99% guaranteed.
Right.
or it's either that or everyone
the
else. The
preponderance of evidence, at least, is against it being true.
Yeah, it's only cis deal in absolute, so I'll skirt as close to that as I can.
Well, and the whole point is that the people that are believers generally have, absolute belief, which, is a funny thing. They're so sure, and nothing that comes up seems to faze a lot of people, which I find to be intellectually dishonest. If you're presented, I have a lot of strong beliefs and assumptions about things, especially about history, if all I've looked, but I'm still open to amend and change that. That's an honest thinker who's willing to be persuaded by facts.
Yeah. By the same token, I guess probably more so than, not more so than anyone actually, because there's a lot of people who I guess have been there. I can understand where people are coming from, because there was one point in my life where I absolutely believed that this was true, and I was even prepared to accept the possibility of a 6,000-year-old young Earth, because that was the religious belief. Now, when I became an atheist, I can tell you now, I didn't suddenly become smarter overnight. I'm still the same dumb person that I was back then. But so I guess I can understand that. But it's where a lot of people struggle, and potentially, depending on the way, if someone had have approached it with me in an aggressive, I think in an aggressive manner, we all kind of just go, no, just go away. My back's against the wall, and I'm going to fight, and I'm going to defend what I believe. Whereas if you can have an honest conversation with someone, I really think that that's how you change minds. Because it was honest conversations, I guess, initially that I had with myself, and probably that no, you're wrong that I got when I was in doing the Old Testament class, that really sort of made me go, hang on. And now, had they not approached it that way, maybe I'd still be a Christian. Maybe I wouldn't have looked into what I looked into, and maybe I'd have that skewed. And I guess it's intellectually it's dishonest, but maybe it's not dishonest. Maybe it's just intellectually flawed.
Well, what I mean by intellectually dishonest, when I say intellectually dishonest, I'm saying when you're presented with facts, like you were just talking about Josephus' story. When you're presented with the facts that Josephus' story is for all intents and purposes a confirmed forgery and fallacy to believe, then to me, continuing to believe that when the preponderance is against it is what I'm talking about is intellectually dishonest. When as you said, it's 99% sure. Well, then you shouldn't believe it, right?
It's possibly intellectually flawed. We're probably clutching at really small stuff there. It's in terminology. It's no, look, I understand where people are coming from, and had someone presented me with Josephus, I probably would have just said, well, how do we know it was, a forgery? And no, I don't want to look into, not interested in it. But now, obviously, having researched it, and look, that was hard. It was something that was very hard for me to go from training to be a pastor and genuinely and honestly believing that I had a relationship with Christ and it was something that was so important in my life to now hear years later saying, well, actually I'm pretty convinced Jesus never even existed. That's a big leap. That's a huge leap to make.
Well, and I'm just saying that I feel like that cognitive dissonance makes it hard for us to accept things that counter our beliefs. But I'm saying when we can actively look at truth and then accept the lie, I feel like we're being intellectually dishonest. I mean, someone could say that they agree with Josephus, as a forgery and still believe Jesus, because just because a source doesn't say it doesn't mean that then it's automatically debunked. And because of that, but it means that source is not credible. It's not a source. Yep. And that's all I was trying to say is that I was saying a Christian could say, okay, Josephus is no good, but I still believe Jesus, was historical, just Josephus didn't talk about it. I mean, so that's what I meant. But to say that Josephus is still a good source when you've seen that it's not a good source, that's what I'm saying is intellectually dishonest. If you know something is not a good source,
I love Josephus. I'm happy whenever because I'll have conversations and look, I do try to gently approach, I guess, because I have a lot of people who I don't know. I think I must be seen as a big scout to bring back to the fold. So I'm always getting people who want to get in touch and want to have these conversations and come back and it's God's put on my heart to reach out to you. And I had one guy who it cracked me up. Someone I probably hadn't spoken to or seen or heard from in about 6 or 7 years. And he sends me a message out of the blue. He said, "Oh, mate, I just want to let you know that God's put on my heart that we've got this thing on at church tonight, and God's put on my heart that you'll really get a lot out of it because, I feel that you're struggling with your faith." And I just sort of sent him something back saying, "I'm struggling with my faith. I've been an atheist for a couple of years, and you only have to have a look at." He sent me this message on Facebook, and it's like you just have to have a look on Facebook to see this. I appreciate the invite. I appreciate what you're doing, but then he wanted to have the conversation and the debate with me about it, and send me all the evidence. And of course, the first thing they do is say, "Have you read the Case for Christ?" It was like, yeah, about 100 times. I've read it. I know Lee Strobel. Yep, no worries. I've read it. Didn't convince me. And then they start to throw all these things and the bad apologetics. But I love it when they bring up Josephus. but Josephus confirms it. I said, yes, let's talk about Josephus. Josephus does confirm something. Let's talk about what Josephus confirms. And that's that there was a forgery made, because obviously even in those days they knew that there wasn't enough evidence to confirm that Christ existed.
Right, and I think that it's good to have the facts, because did you tell that to your friend, and did he have any thinking on it, or he just said he didn't agree?
I would say friend is a very, very, very loose term.
Okay, ex-friend, former acquaintance.
Person I once met, the conversation ended very quietly, and I haven't heard from him since. So after he tried his big, let's say, and look, anyone who's on my Facebook page and is, who I'm Facebook friends with, surely has seen something from me in the last couple of years and knows my position on religion. It's not something that I necessarily keep a secret. I don't go over the top with it. I'm not like a perennial post 20 things a day and share everything. And
quit talking about me.
Sorry,
I said quit talking about me. 20 posts a day. I have atheist written on my forehead.
Not you I'm thinking of there. You're very tame compared to a lot of other people. Some of the stuff that pops up in my feed. From both sides, actually. I get all the Christian stuff from the people I knew from church days, and then the other side is just like, sometimes I'm just like, oh man, I just want to see some politics on Facebook. Come on. And when you're looking for that, there's a problem. But no, anyone who knows, and certainly this person's connected to a lot of people who, I will still talk to, and I know that a lot of them have told me that they're praying for me in their groups and praying for me at their church, that I'll come back, and they know this is just a season, that God's given me this season, and I'll end up coming back to the flock and bringing all these atheists with me. They're convinced that I've got bad news for them. But there's just the fact that he thought, well, I haven't spoken to him. He actually went. He must have. And I thought about this later. I thought he clearly knows, but he thought that he would come across as this prophetic thing to make me go, ooh, how did he know? But I mean, it's like, come on, man, I'm not that dense. I mean, I see what you're doing there. It's okay. But no, so I do get to have a lot of interesting conversation. I've learned to go a bit lighter on I don't really bring up the Jesus mythos stuff, because you mentioned that with a Christian, and that's the end of the conversation. You could present to them evidence. You could have photos of the crucifixion with no Jesus there, and they're not going to buy into it. It's because I've learned how to walk people through the process. But it's always interesting when I love every time they bring up Josephus. Tacitus, that had some. I think there was a few things added into that later as well. I don't know too much about that, actually. Danger Hissy's really good on that. She's really good on all the Roman stuff. But yeah, I always love it when they think they've got me with I got you with Josephus, and I'm like, no, you don't got me. I got you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I have a blog about debunking Jesus, but I just use the Bible. That's it. I don't use any other source. I just use the Bible itself to debunk Jesus. Because there's verses in the Bible that when you look at them all together, the Bible itself doesn't really totally, in a sense, believe Jesus. It flat out several times says, I'm not God. I mean, how can you then later say he is God when he says, it goes, no one is greater than the Father, and the Father is greater than me. Like, okay, then it's not the same person. I mean,
from a pure theological standpoint, Trinity doesn't work. The Trinity doesn't work, and the Trinity was meshed together because the Trinity, it was fairly divided. So, I guess half the people hearing from God were getting told one thing, and the other half hearing from God were getting told another thing. So God was confusing a lot of people at that time. And, then this wanted to hear that, and but somehow they managed to vote for the Bible. I mean, good things don't always happen when people vote for them.
Yeah, we got Trump. Yeah, so
you guys have got a very messed up political system. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, it's run by an orange clown. So
the worst thing is the alternative isn't much better. It's really like what was the Simpsons episode where it was Kane versus Kodos, and they said it's a two-party system.
Yeah, I'm not very happy about America's politics. But say that from what you've learned, what would you say is about like you said about Jesus? What would you say you're going to particularly focus on to address? I mean, you said Jesus mythicism, but you're going to do the whole story or just certain parts, or you're going to do the story of Jesus plus like surrounding, like you said, the Romans or the Jewish communities in the area.
Well, look, I think as part of it, and I mean, obviously, the main focus of the question will be, did Jesus exist as he's portrayed in any of the Gospels? Did he exist as he was portrayed in one of the Gospels? Did he not exist at all? Look, I do have an opinion on it. I need to kind of be mindful when I go into it that I do have that opinion. But I guess it's all been part of the study journey. But I think what the interesting thing to look at is, right, well, what's a good clue as to whether Jesus existed? Did Peter exist? Did the other disciples? Is there evidence for these Jewish leaders in the times after? Now, there certainly is some that comes from the epistles, but do we know whether these people would have actually been going around with Jesus or with a rabbi who was preaching certain things? So I guess that's probably, I guess I want to sort of look at what people like Richard Carrier have done and maybe sort of take it in a different direction. But that's probably going to be more of a passion project for me.
So passion project is then you're going to write a book on it, or you're just going to do research?
Ideally, I'd like to write a book on it at some point. But I mean, we're probably 10 years down the track. I guess the first thing I've got to do is finish, not put the horse before the cart before the horse. I've got to finish my undergraduate, which that's fine. I'll do it, and short of me completely failing a couple of subjects, I've got the results to get into the postgrad stuff, and then I guess it's sort of 3.5 years roughly to do the PhD. Maybe I'll finish it sooner. That'll probably, I guess, for that time will probably put me more in the modern history realm. So I guess the plan is to ideally start researching, but also to teach and lecture at a university level. And then from there, I guess that's when I can I'll branch off into some of these. Well, not some of these, but I'll probably branch off into something like that. So we're probably 10 years down the track before I'm realistically in a position to do that properly and actually put the time and effort in. But I guess I'm thinking more long term lately. So.
Right on. So do you have any goals as an atheist or as your atheist pastor to go out and do anything particular? Like, do you have a YouTube? Are you going to do a blog?
Yeah.
I mean, is there other things that, in your future?
Yeah, look, so I've got a YouTube channel at the moment. The main thing we do I guess my main focus is I don't go firebrand too much. I'm more about community. One thing I noticed when I left the church was a lot of people just dropped, and I lost that sense of community. And what I found in having conversations with other people within the atheist community is my experience is very much not a unique experience. There's a lot of people who all of a sudden didn't have that community, or found themselves in positions where they were sort of shunned by family, by friends, and it can be a very lonely place. And for me, I guess, and I guess this is part of where the pastor side of it comes back into. I mean, I've got training as a pastor, so I may as well use that for good. So it's very much what I do is community focused. So, I can certainly, I've had the debates with Darth Dawkins, and I'll have a bit of fun with stuff like that. But, I run every Friday and every Tuesday. I run a show called Six Pack, which is where 6 of us just get together, and it's a different topic every time. But the main thing is about engaging with each other, talking to each other. It's fairly light-hearted. We're not sort of digging right into the hardcore theological sort of things. I mean, the last one we did, we laughed at the dumbest Christian tweets about the pandemic. So that sort of gives you a bit of an idea, and we just like to have a bit of fun with it. So I've got that running at the moment. I'm actually working on a new channel with Mama Atheist, Amanda, where we're setting something up for kids. So it's called Exodus Youth, which is going to be focused on helping kids who are atheist or who have got questions about atheists. So, we're going to have two paths, which will be kids who are in religious households but identify as atheists, I guess, being there and offering some support and for them. And also for kids who are atheists in atheist households but find themselves, especially over in the US, in a very religious society, sort of how they can deal with it. I guess understanding things that the Bible teaches and where there's flaws. So we will go into, I guess, a few things there. But yeah, that's something that I guess that's probably going to be the passion project for what I'm doing. But look, my main thing, the reason I started doing this was out of guilt, because I was very good as an evangelist. I brought a lot of people to Christ, and I've got immense guilt over that. I never went and intentionally did the wrong thing, but certainly it was always with good intentions. I believed I was saving people's souls, but now I sort of look at that and I look at the damage that religion can do, and I even identify some things that I used to do, even the way that I'd speak and the way that we get people into the church, and I can see a lot of the issues and the deception that happens there, even when it's very much unwitting. So I guess I do want to make amends in a way, but also I just love the community. The atheist community has been so open and accepting. I came in, I'm someone who's politically conservative, and I thought this community is just going to hate me, but quite the opposite's happened. And I'll just clarify, why conservative is very different in the rest of the world to what it is in America.
Right. Isn't that would be the same as probably a Democrat here, a conservative there, or I think even yours might even be more left, right, or something like that. Because I know that term doesn't mean the same.
Our Conservative Party is called the Liberal Party, so that probably gives you a bit of an idea. But
right.
I mean, and our Conservative Party just in the state I live in actually introduced and passed the abortion laws to legalise abortion. Same-sex marriage happened under a Conservative government.
Right. So I mean, what I'm saying is that term doesn't mean the same as in the United States. You would be against abortion and
conservatism very much entrenched in the social issues and religion, whereas in somewhere like Australia, Europe, it's more economic policy. And even then, the economic conservatism in the US it's a completely different thing again. It seems to be in the US you've got two extremes and nothing in the middle, whereas I think most of the world has got a lot in the middle with a few on the extreme edges. But it's interesting looking at. But I had concerns sort of coming into the community in that way. But the community's just embraced me, just loved me, and I've made so many great friends and friendships that will last for life. Genuine friendships where with people who we can disagree on things, we can have a difference of opinion, but we're all it's just good people. I've just met so many good people, and there's a few assholes as well. There's a few people who
I've met some of those.
They're probably doing it for the wrong reasons, but there's some great people in the community, and I guess it's a little bit selfish. I like being a part of the community. There is that, and I guess I like to be able to help people in the community. So maybe that's a bit of I don't know. It's a selfish thing, I guess, but there was a lot of guilt that got me into it. But it's my love of the community that's keeping me in it.
That's great. So we're going to go ahead and end it. Go ahead before we end and just tell us where to find you and how to look you up or whatever you want.
Yeah, look, you can find me on Twitter at Atheist_Pastor, and my YouTube channel, if you just youtube.com/Atheist Pastor, all one word, you'll find me there. We run a Friday night and a Tuesday night show, or Friday night and Tuesday night for me, Friday morning, Tuesday morning for those of you in the US and Europe, which is just very much a community-driven show, different topics every week, sometimes serious. Generally, it's just a bunch of Aussies sitting around drinking and talking life. It's good fun. We'll have to get you on sometime.
Right on, I will. And I'm going to go ahead and put, for anyone listening, I'm going to go ahead and put links to him in the information so you can get him also. All right, well, I appreciate it, and thank you for your time, and I like hearing about history. It's something that I enjoy. I really appreciate having you on, and all right, bye-bye.